In the quiet folds of Asia, where the air still remembers every whispered prayer, there are places the sun has long forgotten, and voices that only speak when the world goes still. This is Whispers of Asia, where we do not tell stories. We unearth what was never meant to be found. We listen to what should have stayed buried. Tonight, we follow the echo of a bell, one that should never ring, not with a hand, not with a wind, but with the breath of the dead. A cursed bell, forged in silence, awakened by karma, and tolling for the forgotten. Each midnight, it calls to those buried deep beneath temple stone, where monks dare not walk and prayers go unanswered. This is the story of the temple bell that rang by itself at midnight. Sit still, listen carefully, and if you hear the bell toll as you listen, remember, it's not calling for you, not yet. The road twisted upward like a question never meant to be answered. Anun stood beneath the mountain's breath, fog curling around his ankles like curious fingers. The stone steps leading to Wat Siri Chai were worn from centuries of barefoot prayers, smooth in the center, chipped at the edges like mouths that had whispered too many regrets. He clutched the strap of his canvas satchel and began the climb. With each step, the forest behind him fell into deeper silence. Not even the wind dared disturb the leaves here, just the steady toll of his own breath, and something else, a sound that didn't belong. Far above, from a shadow-cloaked tower hidden behind the old temple gates, a bell rang. Once. Its echo moved like oil down the mountainside, slow, heavy, and impossible to escape. Anun froze. The rope of fear tugged somewhere deep in his ribs. The bell didn't sound like the joyous chime of arrival or the call to morning alms. It sounded like mourning, long and hollow, like the world was being told someone had just died. But the sun had not yet set. No one should be ringing the bell at this hour, and no novice had been taught to do so. He looked up. Fog shifted around the temple's silhouette like smoke from an unseen incense stick. The second toll never came. Just one. Just once. He reached the last stair just as a shadow slipped past the stone lanterns that lined the entry gate. A man in saffron robes appeared as if conjured, a senior monk, his head bowed, hands clasped in front of him like the stone statues that flanked the gate. "Anun," the monk said without lifting his eyes, "from Chiang Mai." Anun nodded. "Yes, Venerable. I was sent by the forest Sangha." The monk turned slowly. His eyes were tired, not aged, tired in a deeper way, as if he hadn't slept through a full night in years. "We were not expecting another novice so soon, but perhaps the temple knows more than we do." Before Anun could respond, the monk turned and led him through the gate. Wat Sirichai greeted him with silence. Not peace, not serenity, but a hush so profound it felt like something was waiting. The wooden beams creaked, not with wind, but with memory. Trees loomed at the edge of the grounds, their roots thick and gnarled, like they were gripping the earth for dear life. The bell tower stood at the rear of the temple. It was tall and narrow, wrapped in dark moss and the scent of old stone. Anun caught himself staring at it. "It shouldn't have rung," the monk beside him said suddenly. "Excuse me?" "The bell. You heard it." "Yes, He hesitated. Yes, just once. The monk exhaled through his nose, as though confirming something to himself. No one rang it. The rope was cut long ago. You are not to go near it. Anun swallowed. I understand. The monk gave a curt nod, then added softly, and if you hear it again, ignore it, as we all do. That night, Anun was given a modest cell behind the main hall, a room of wood and stone, with no mirror, no curtain, and a single candle that flickered against the far wall. He tried to meditate, but his thoughts wandered back to the sound, that single, long toll, and the way it had seemed to bend the air around it. Bells, he had been taught, were sacred. They summoned awareness, woke the mind. But this bell felt different, as if it wasn't calling the living, but something else. At midnight, just as his breath began to even and his eyes slipped shut, it rang again, softly, distantly, but with perfect clarity. Once. Anun sat bolt upright. The candle flickered, although there was no breeze. The air in his room had changed, denser, colder. He waited. No footsteps, no creak of wood, just silence. The kind that pressed against the eardrums until even your own heartbeat felt too loud. Then, a whisper. Not a voice, but just the sense of one. Not in his ears, in the bones behind them. Anun rose and stepped into the corridor. The hallway was lit only by a single lantern at the far end, casting shadows like robes fluttering in prayer. He walked, slowly, barefoot against the worn wooden floor, toward the bell tower. He never made it. A figure stepped into his path, the abbot. Old, stooped, his eyes sharp beneath thick white brows. You heard it, the abbot said. Not a question, a sentence passed like judgment. Anun lowered his gaze. Yes. The abbot sighed and closed his eyes. So it begins again. Morning at Wat Siri Shai arrived without birdsong. The jungle outside the temple lay still, as if the trees themselves feared to breathe. Mist hung low, coiling through the open courtyards and around the bell tower that loomed like a finger pointing at the heavens. Anun awoke before dawn, but the memory of the midnight toll clung to him like cold smoke. His dreams had been a blur of flickering lights and silent chanting, monks kneeling in rows with no faces, mouths sewn shut by shadows. He washed, dressed, and stepped quietly into the courtyard. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of moss and incense long burned out. At the far end, near the cracked stone path leading to the bell tower, the abbot was already sweeping the ground. Each movement was slow, deliberate, as though he feared to disturb what slept beneath. When Anun bowed, the abbot did not turn. "Do not look toward the tower this morning," the old man murmured. "It remembers those who look." Anun hesitated. "Venerable Father, last night I heard it too, and we will not speak of it again." There was something final in his tone, like a door closing. But Anun could not silence the pull inside him, the curiosity that had led him here, to a temple shunned even by other monasteries. He bowed again and made his way toward the library hall, where ancient scrolls slept in their wooden cases. The corridor floor was uneven here, the stone blocks cracked and sinking toward the center. As he stepped across one, a faint sound rose beneath his feet, a murmur, like chanting. He froze. The sound was faint, just a breath under the stone. He knelt, pressing his ear to the floor. At first, only silence. Then, unmistakably, a voice, soft, rhythmic, reciting in Pali. But it wasn't any prayer he recognized. He whispered a verse for protection under his breath and moved his hand across the crack. The stone was cold, colder than the air, and from within that cold came a pulse like a heartbeat beneath the earth. He drew back sharply. That night, the sound returned. While sweeping the outer courtyard after evening chanting, a nun saw the old groundskeeper, a thin man with a bent spine and eyes that never met yours, placing salt lines along the edges of the bell tower. "Why salt?" a nun asked quietly. The man did not answer. He only said, "Do not sweep it away." Later, as Anand ate his simple meal in silence, a candle flickered near the window. The flame bent sharply, though no wind touched it. A whisper seemed to travel through the rafters, not in words, but in tone, low, trembling, almost sorrowful. He followed it to the prayer hall, where moonlight spilled through the cracks in the roof. The great Buddha statue sat in the center, its gilded face worn and darkened by time. Beneath it, the floor was uneven. A nun crouched, brushing aside the dust. Between two ancient stones, a thin slit revealed darkness below. He leaned closer and froze. The whisper came from inside that slit. It was not the sound of wind, it was breath. And then, faint but clear, a word. His name. Anand. Anand. He stumbled back, striking his shoulder against a wooden pillar. His candle fell, sputtering out. When he looked again, the slit was gone. The floor looked whole, unbroken, but the voice was real. That night, the bell did not ring. Yet he woke at midnight all the same, his ears straining for a sound he feared and craved in equal measure. The silence felt too full. He sat up, listening. The wooden beams creaked above him as if shifting under invisible weight. Then came the faintest echo, like a rope brushing against iron, a bell rope. He rose, heart pounding, and opened his door. The corridor was empty. The lantern at the end flickered dimly, its flame thinning to a ghost of light. He walked. Each step was swallowed by the dark. At the far end, near the stair that led to the bell tower, something shimmered on the ground, white dust, scattered like a trail. Salt. And beyond the salt line, footprints, bare, wet, and facing the wrong direction. They led toward the tower, and then stopped. The footprints ended right before the old cracked stone floor. The final print pressed deep into the dust, as though someone had stepped down into the ground itself. Anand knelt, trembling. The air around him smelled faintly of iron, of blood, and rusted bells. He whispered a prayer, voice shaking. "May all beings find peace." From beneath the floor, something whispered back. It wasn't a voice this time. It was the faint vibration of metal, like a bell, ringing, deep under the earth. Once, then silence. Anand fell to his knees. His candlelight died completely. And for a moment, just a heartbeat, he swore he heard the chanting again. But now, It wasn't sorrowful. It was hungry. The night silence never truly left Wat Sirichai. It lingered in the corridors like a breath that refused to exhale, stretching into dawn, into day, into the edges of thought itself. Anun could no longer tell when the day began. The air was too still, and the temple bell, though motionless, seemed to hum faintly, a sound that wasn't sound, vibrating just beneath hearing. He busied himself with routine, sweeping the courtyard, fetching water, polishing brass lamps that no one dared light after sunset. Every act felt like a prayer against what waited in the shadows. By noon, the abbot summoned him. The inner chamber smelled of sandalwood and cold stone. Scrolls lined the walls, though many were sealed shut with red wax. The abbot sat cross-legged beside a low table, his eyes shadowed by the flickering oil lamp. "You have been hearing things," the abbot said, without looking up. Anun bowed. "Yes, Venerable. Beneath the floor, and last night." "You should have ignored it." The words were soft, but they cut. "I tried." The abbot's gaze lifted. "The floor you walked upon covers more than stone. Beneath it lies what was meant to stay sealed. This temple was not built to pray to the gods, but to keep something from praying back." Anun swallowed. "To what?" The abbot did not answer. Instead, he reached for a thin black scroll bound with twine. "You will not open this. You will move it to the locked chest in the library and place it beneath the rest." Anun accepted the scroll with a bow. As he turned to leave, the abbot added, "If you ever read from it, the bell will answer. Once awakened, it cannot sleep again." The novice bowed once more, heart pounding. Outside, the afternoon sun glowed weakly behind a veil of mist. The temple grounds looked half asleep, as if reality itself was weary. He carried the scroll to the library, an ancient hall with carved pillars and thick air that smelled of ink, dust, and decay. The library's silence was alive. Every step echoed too long. He found the chest in the corner, a heavy box of lacquered wood carved with spiraling scripts he couldn't read. As he bent to lift the lid, something caught his eye. A small opening behind the shelves where a beam of light revealed an alcove. Inside, hidden among stacks of forbidden scriptures, lay an older scroll, not tied with twine, but with strands of hair. Human hair, brittle and gray. The parchment pulsed faintly, as if remembering breath. A small line painted in dried vermilion marked its seal. "Do not chant after midnight." His fingers trembled as he untied it. The script inside was unlike any he'd seen, sharp, slanted, etched into the paper as if burned rather than written. The words curved like serpents. Even without understanding, he felt them pressing against his mind, reshaping thought into rhythm. He whispered the first syllable, just once. The air changed. Candles flickered though there was no wind. A low vibration trembled through the floorboards, the same faint resonance that always preceded the bell's toll. He stumbled back, dropping the scroll. It landed open, revealing the full verse. Not a prayer, a summoning. He shut his eyes, forcing his breath steady, repeating a cleansing mantra. The vibration stopped. The silence returned. But when he looked down, the scroll had vanished. The space it had occupied now showed only a thin smear of red, glistening faintly, like fresh ink or blood. That night, Anun could not sleep. The abbot's warning gnawed at him, but curiosity was stronger than fear. "The bell will answer," the abbot had said. Yet he couldn't stop thinking, answer to what? At midnight, the air thickened. The bell did not ring, but the walls breathed. From beneath the floor came a murmur, a prayer half-spoken, half-remembered. He recognized fragments from the forbidden verse. Then a second voice joined in, and a third, until it was a chorus. The sound moved through the stone like a tide rising from below, pressing upward, shaking dust loose from the ceiling. Anun covered his ears, but the sound wasn't entering through them, it was inside his head. He opened his eyes to find his candlelight bending toward the wall. Shadows stretched long, too long, forming shapes that looked like monks in meditation. But these monks had no faces. Their heads hung forward, their hands clasped in silent prayer. Anun tried to stand, but his legs refused. His voice trembled as he whispered a chant of protection. The figures swayed with his words, as if echoing them, repeating the syllables in reverse. When he reached the final line, they stopped. And then, from nowhere and everywhere, came the faint ring of metal. The bell. Not loud, not distant, but soft and near, as though it were ringing inside his cell. The flame snuffed out. In the dark, he saw it. Just for a moment. A pale hand pressing up through the floorboards, fingers curling, nails blackened by earth. The bell tolled once more, and everything went still. When morning came, Anun woke on the floor, his candle upright and unburned. No sign of the scroll, no cracks in the floor. But his tongue felt heavy, coated in the taste of ash. And when he looked in the bronze water basin, he found his reflection whispering the words he had read. Without sound, without control, only the motion of his lips, forming the forbidden prayer. There is a silence that soothes, and there is a silence that waits. Wat Sirichai no longer held the first kind. Since the night Anun had seen the hand rise from the floor, the silence inside the temple had grown thicker, like air steeped in old breath. It followed him through each corridor, trailing behind him like a shadow one step too close. The bell had not rung again audibly, but Anun no longer trusted his ears. He felt the tolling in other ways now, beneath his skin, in the marrow of his bones, in the way the flame of a candle would bend when no wind blew. The bell was speaking, not in sound, but in presence. Something was awakening, and it was watching him. That morning, Brother Somchai, one of the elder monks, collapsed during walking meditation. His body folded into itself like paper, eyes wide open, fixed on the bell tower. He was still breathing, but he would not speak. His lips moved, endlessly repeating one word: kneeling, kneeling, kneeling. Anun sat beside him in the infirmary, watching the old monk rock gently. His fingers clutched the hem of his robes like a child lost in the dark. The abbot entered quietly. "No chanting tonight," he said. "Venerable Father, what's happening?" The abbot's face was weary. His eyes no longer held frustration, only a distant sadness, as though he had already buried this moment in his mind long ago. "The bell does not wake alone," he said. "It calls, but something answers." That night, The bell rang at midnight, but only once, and only for Anun. He sat up instantly, heart already racing. The air was heavier, as if soaked in water that wasn't wet. He opened his door and stepped into the corridor. The lanterns were lit, but no one had lit them. Each flickered in rhythm, left, then right, then forward, guiding him like a silent procession. They led to the old courtyard, to the bell tower. The tower's base had been sealed with prayer stones since the last collapse. Moss clung to its flanks like rot on a bone. But now the stones were cracked, the seal had shifted, a thin line had opened, just wide enough to pass through. Anun hesitated, then stepped inside. The tower was hollow, its wooden stairs long decayed. The bell hung above, suspended by a frayed iron chain that looked brittle enough to snap at a breath. The rope below it was severed, just as the abbot had said. Yet the bell swayed gently in the still air. And on the ground, footprints, bare, wet, leading in circles. He wasn't alone. He heard it before he saw it, a soft scrape like cloth dragged across stone. Then from the dark, something crawled forward. A figure, human, but wrong. It moved in prayer posture, hands pressed together, knees dragging. The robes were ancient, blackened with soil, and where its face should have been was only a mouth, sewn shut, smiling. Anun couldn't move. The figure crawled in a slow spiral around the bell, whispering through its sewn lips. No sound emerged, but the words formed in Anun's mind like ink in water. I heard the bell. I answered. Now it's your turn. Anun staggered back, but his feet would not obey. The bell swayed harder now, though no one touched it. Wind howled through the cracks in the tower, yet the air around him was still. Then he saw the floor. It was not stone, not entirely. Faces, pressed beneath the surface, as if buried just beneath the sheet of glass. Silent monks, some blindfolded, some with gaping mouths frozen in scream. Their fingers reached upward toward the bell, toward him. He looked down and saw his own reflection joining theirs. His mouth was moving, chanting, a prayer he did not choose. With sudden force he turned and ran, out through the crack, across the courtyard, heart hammering louder than the bell ever could. Behind him, the tower exhaled, and from that exhale, the entire temple seemed to breathe. Doors creaked open without touch, candles dimmed, wind circled in tight, deliberate spirals. He collapsed in the main hall. The Buddha statue loomed above, its gold flaking with age, its eyes lowered in eternal mercy. But mercy did not reach here anymore. From beneath the altar, a sound rose, a slow, steady knocking. Not wood, not metal, but bone. Something was awakening, and it was climbing. The abbot found him hours later, curled in the fetal position, sweat-drenched, whispering fragments of a chant he did not know. He never remembered the words afterwards, but he remembered the final image before blacking out. The bell tower, swaying, and in the shadow behind it, a second bell, cracked, buried, and just beginning to ring. By morning, Anun's fever had broken, but the chills remained. He sat outside the prayer hall, wrapped in the blanket of silence that felt too thick to speak through. Around him, the temple breathed like a dying animal, slow, pained, and aware of its own decay. The trees cast no shadows. The sky, though bright, held no warmth. Brother Samshai had not moved since his collapse. He now lay in the meditation hall, eyes wide, pupils flicking rapidly beneath the lids. He no longer muttered, kneeling. He no longer spoke at all. The monks avoided him now, avoided each other too. Something unspoken had begun to settle into their bones. The knowing that something once buried was now stirring, and it had a name no one wanted to say. That afternoon, while sweeping the rear gardens near the base of the bell tower, a nun noticed a section of earth that seemed softer, not disturbed, not recently dug, just wrong. The ground gave beneath his foot, and he nearly sank. When he knelt to examine it, he found something buried just beneath the moss, a small wooden tag, the kind used to mark the names of deceased monks during cremation rites. The name had been carved and then scratched out violently. Below it, another, and another, all scratched. The wood was brittle with age, darkened by moisture and rot, but the arrangement was deliberate. A hidden graveyard, a forbidden one. As a nun brushed away the moss, more of the small markers emerged. Dozens, all broken, all forgotten. He didn't realize the abbot was behind him until the older man spoke. There were monks who sought to live beyond prayer. They chanted not to release the soul, but to bind it. Anun turned slowly. They weren't cremated? The abbot's face was still, but his eyes were exhausted. No, flame would not take them. They were buried beneath the bell instead. Anun's voice dropped to a whisper. Why? The abbot stared into the trees, as if the forest would speak for him. The bell is not a symbol, it is a seal. It was meant to hold what could not be burned. He crouched and gently replaced the moss over the markers. There were monks who sought to live beyond prayer. They chanted not to release the soul, but to bind it. Anun swallowed. And the bell? The abbot nodded. It remembers every name, even the ones we forget. That night, Anun returned to the rear garden alone. He brought a lantern and prayer beads, unsure if he meant to protect himself or offer something to the restless dead. He sat cross-legged near the buried markers, whispering blessings. The earth beneath him was colder than stone. Then he heard it, a low, rhythmic chant, not in the air, not outside, from beneath him. He placed his palm on the ground. It vibrated faintly like something breathing just beneath the surface. The cadence was familiar, a meditative drone, but the tone was wrong. There was hunger in it, and laughter. He stood and backed away, but his foot caught on a root. He stumbled, and where he landed, the ground gave way. It cracked open like a rib. Inside was a chamber, narrow, earthen, lined with figures seated in perfect lotus position, wrapped in decayed robes, hands pressed together in prayer. Their skin leathery and gray. Their mouths sewn shut with black thread. Each held a prayer scroll on their lap. Each bore a tag with a name, scratched out. All faced upward, all toward the bell tower. Anun staggered back, bile rising in his throat. Then, from the far end of the chamber, something shifted. Not one of the seated bodies, but a figure, standing, too tall, too thin, draped in layers of torn cloth and rust-colored robes. No eyes, no face, only a mouth sewn shut with thick twine. And yet, it smiled. The lantern dimmed. Anun heard the bell, not once, but twice, and beneath its echo the sound of soil shifting. Hands clawing from beneath every burial stone. He scrambled from the hole, sealing it with his weight, whispering chants, sobbing into the earth. Above him the bell tolled a third time, and then silence. But not peace. He looked to the tower. The chain that held the bell was now swaying, and in the moonlight he saw something that hadn't been there before. A fresh tag, wedged into the wooden base of the tower, unmarked, waiting for a name. There is a name no longer spoken at Wat Sirichai, not because it was lost, but because it was erased. Anun first heard it in a whisper, not from a monk, but from the walls. The temple had begun to speak in ways only he could hear, floorboards creaking in patterns like footsteps pacing beneath the earth, wind breathing syllables through gaps in the shutters, candle flames that flared when he passed the old statues lining the hall. All of them wanted him to remember someone who was meant to be forgotten. The next morning, the abbot summoned him. They sat in the old scripture hall, where sunlight filtered weakly through colored glass and painted ghosts onto the floor. The abbot set down an object wrapped in faded saffron cloth. "Before you ask questions," he said quietly, "you must hear a story we swore never to repeat." Anun listened as the abbot slowly unwrapped the cloth. Inside was a small wooden box, stained dark, corners cracked. He opened it with reverence, as if to expect it to scream. Inside lay a fragment of an old bell rope. It was blackened at the end, burned, frayed, and wrapped in prayer beads. This belonged to Pra Tamnan, the monk who rang the bell. Anun's breath caught. The name felt heavy in the air, as if it pulled the light from the room. "He was once the most devoted of us," the abbot said. "Decades ago, when I was still a novice, he chanted longer, fasted harder, meditated in the forest for weeks without food or shelter. The elders thought he was blessed." He paused. "But devotion is not always pure. He didn't seek enlightenment. He sought control." The old man ran a finger across the prayer beads. "One night, during the season of ghosts, he locked himself in the bell tower. At midnight, he rang the bell not to call the living, but to awaken the unheard." "Spirits?" Anun whispered. The abbot nodded. "And worse, echoes of those who were never meant to be born into this world. He offered himself as a vessel to speak the words they could not. He performed the chant forbidden in all schools of the Sangha, the feast of lost tongues." Anun's heart was thudding now. What happened to him? "No one knows," the abbot replied. "When we forced the door open, he was gone. The bell was still swaying, but the rope had burned away. Only his beads remained, scorched into the floor." He closed the box and rewrapped it. "We sealed the tower. We buried the others who had joined him in silence. Their tongues were found shriveled, blackened. None of them had any breath left to die with." Anun closed his eyes. He remembered the crawling figure from the night before, the sewn lips, the hungry smile. The abbot rose to leave, but turned at the threshold. "If the bell calls again, Do not answer. That night, Anun sat in the prayer hall, the taste of ash still on his tongue. The air felt thick with waiting. Outside, the wind was absent, the sky starless. At midnight, the bell rang, but not once, not twice, 7 times. Each toll came slower, heavier, like the bell was lowering something into the earth. And each toll joined it, a new sound, chanting, not human, not from the mouths of monks. It came from beneath. Anun stepped into the courtyard. The temple had changed. Candles flickered in the windows of buildings long abandoned. The old infirmary doors were open. Shadows sat cross-legged beneath the Bodhi tree, even though no monks had been assigned night meditation. He followed the chanting. It led him not to the bell tower, but to the cremation grounds. The fire pit was lit, but no one stood near it. A single figure sat beside the flames, robed, still, waiting. Anun approached slowly, whispering a mantra. The figure turned, and there was no face, only a tightly sewn mouth. The thread glistened wet, as though freshly pulled through skin. In its hands, it held a half-burned scroll, the forbidden chant, and around its neck hung a string of scorched prayer beads. Anun fell to his knees. The figure rose. The ground beneath the cremation pit cracked, and from the ash, arms emerged, dozens, pushing upward, fingers smeared with soot and silence. The bell tolled again, and the faceless monk raised the scroll as if in offering. But before he could open it, a second figure appeared. The abbot, his robe whipped by wind that did not exist. He struck the scroll from the monk's hands and drove his staff into the earth. The soil hissed, smoking where it touched wood. Chanting filled the air now, real chanting, from the living monks, from Anun's own throat. He didn't know the words, but they spilled from him, urgent, sharp, cleansing. The faceless monk recoiled. Smoke rose from its seams. Its hands twisted unnaturally as it turned toward the bell tower, shrinking into the shadows, leaving only the scroll behind. The fire went out. The pit collapsed into silence. The bell no longer rang. But Anun knew now, the monk who rang the bell was not gone. He was waiting, not in the tower, but in the chant. And the next time it is spoken, he will finish what he begun. There was a rule as old as the temple itself. At sunset, every monk must chant, not because the heavens demanded it, but because something else listened when they didn't. For over 100 years, that vow had never been broken, until tonight. It began with silence, not deliberate, but infected. The older monks could feel it in their joints as dusk approached, a weight pressing against the spine, a hand resting lightly on the back of the neck. The younger novices whispered about hearing their own names called during meditation, about shadows that remained kneeling even after the monks stood. Anun didn't join the evening chant, nor did the abbot, nor did anyone. At sunset, the gongs remained still, the incense never lit. The sutras lay open and unread. Instead, the monks gathered in the great hall, not in rows, but scattered like drifting leaves, each sitting alone. The air between them was thick, as if sound had been drawn out of the world. Even the cicadas outside had gone mute. No one knew who had decided not to pray, but they all obeyed, and the temple exhaled, a deep, slow breath, like stone shifting. It began subtly, the flickering of lamps in unison. Then the echo of wooden chimes swinging, though the wind was still. The bamboo grove behind the cremation hall trembled, though nothing touched it. Then came the sound. The bell. Not once, not twice, but 7 times again. Each toll deeper, slower, like it was not ringing across air, but through earth. Monks froze in place. None dared speak. Then, movement. From the far end of the hall, a monk rose. It was Brother Somchai, the one who hadn't spoken in days. His eyes were wide, pupils like pinpoints. He stepped forward without blinking, robes dragging behind him, and began to pray. But not in Pali, not in Thai, not in any language born of this world. The words rasped like stone scraping bone. Each syllable made the floorboards groan. The candles dimmed, bowing toward him as if afraid. Anun tried to move, to rise, to stop him, but his limbs would not obey. Then the bell tolled once more, and Brother Somchai vanished. Not collapsed, not dissolved. He simply stopped existing, as if the world had remembered it had forgotten him. Where he had stood, only his folded robes remained, and in the air, the faint smell of iron and wet soil. The abbot stood. His voice cracked as he spoke. We forgot the chant, and something else remembered. Outside, the bell tower swayed gently in a wind that did not touch the trees. Candles blew out on their own. From deep within the earth, the echo of the unspoken chant pulsed, as if the ground itself was reciting. That night, no one slept. They sat in silence, eyes wide, heads bowed, not in prayer, but in dread. For the first time in its history, Wat Sirichai became a place without chanting, and the bell had noticed. Not all doors are made to open. Some are meant only to seal. And beneath Wat Sirichai, one such door had begun to breathe. After the night without prayer, the temple changed. It didn't collapse, it didn't scream, it simply shifted. Walls leaned inward as if listening. Candles flickered in rhythm with no discernible wind, and the bell tower, though untouched, cast a longer shadow than before, one that stretched toward the main hall even at noon. Anun could feel it. So could the abbot. So could the ground. And the altar stones, the ones that had not moved in centuries, began to warm beneath the soles of monks who dared approach them. The morning after Somchai vanished, Anun awoke to find his room filled with dust. Not ordinary dust. This dust was red, fine as powdered rust. It covered his robe, his pillow, even the inside of his mouth. He rushed outside. The temple courtyard was untouched, but when he entered the prayer hall, he saw it. A single line of red dust drawn perfectly in a square at the base of the altar. Inside the square was an offering bowl, empty. The abbot arrived within minutes, face pale. "It's begun," he whispered. Anun knelt beside the altar. "What is this?" The abbot placed his palm on the stone floor. "There is a hollow space beneath this altar, sealed hundreds of years ago. It holds the bodies of those who performed the chant, and one scroll that was never meant to be read." Anun's breath caught. Why was it sealed here? Why not destroy it? The abbot's voice became brittle. "Because it speaks even when it burns." That night, Anun returned alone. He could not resist. The altar stones called to him, not with sound, but with pressure, like standing too close to a waterfall. They pulsed faintly beneath his feet, as though something within was drawing breath. He lit no candle. He needed no light. The altar glowed with a faintest shimmer, a sickly reflection from the moon through the cracked tiles above. He placed his hands on the edge of the central slab and pushed. To his surprise, it moved. Not easily, but willingly. Beneath was a narrow stairwell, carved from old, uneven stone. The air that rose from it smelled of centuries, damp incense, burnt oil, and something darker. Earth that had not seen air, silence that had never heard light. He descended. 1 step, 2, 10. The darkness became a texture, thick, heavy, alive. At the base he found a room no larger than a monk's cell. The walls were covered in prayer scrolls, stitched into the stone with black thread, not pinned or pasted. Each one fluttered as though breathing, and in the center, a circle of seated monks, 6 of them, perfect lotus posture, ropes still binding their torsos, heads bowed, turned to ash, except their hands. Their hands were preserved, flesh intact, nail fingers long, still clutching prayer beads. Anun trembled. One of the figures moved, not suddenly, not aggressively, but slowly, like someone rousing from a long sleep. Its head lifted, eyes gone, skin peeled, but its mouth moved, and the sound that came forth was not a voice, it was the sound of a bell, a single muffled gong from inside its throat. Then the others stirred. The prayer scrolls on the walls flared as if struck by wind, but there was no wind, only the air changing shape. In the far wall, a recess, a small alcove began to glow. Anun stepped toward it, against every instinct. Inside lay a scroll, not wrapped, not hidden, just waiting. It was stitched with gold thread and sealed with a knot of hair. His fingers reached out. The scroll was warm, as though someone had just set it down. He didn't open it. He didn't need to, because when his hand touched the seal, he heard it. The bell. Above. Outside. Inside. Tolling once. Then twice. Then again and again, until he could no longer tell whether it echoed through the air or through his chest. He dropped the scroll and fled. The stairs twisted behind him, tighter than before. The exit flickered as if unsure whether it wanted to exist. But he made it out. The altar closed on its own, sealed, quiet. For now. He collapsed in the hall, panting. The abbot found him just before dawn. Anun looked up with hollow eyes. There are monks still sitting down there, still praying, still waiting. The abbot placed a hand on his shoulder. They are not monks, not anymore. The cremation pit had not been used in years, not since the fire refused to take the last body. It was said that when monks die in peace, their flesh rises in smoke. But when they die in silence, silence filled with unsaid prayers and unfinished karma, the flame forgets how to consume them, and so it smolders. It was here that Anun stood now, barefoot before the cold ashes of Wat Sirichai's forgotten pyre. The morning fog had not lifted, and no birds dared return to the trees. In his hands he held a bundle of incense soaked in ghee and salt. The abbot had said nothing when he took it, only looked at him with eyes that had grown too used to letting go. Anun knelt and placed the incense into the ashes. As the smoke rose, the wind changed. It did not blow, it curled inward, folding around his body like a breath drawn backward. The ashes shifted. And then, for the first time, Anun heard it. A voice. Not in the wind, not in the smoke, but in the ash itself. It spoke in rhythm, not words, but syllables that pulsed like a heartbeat in reverse. He bent closer. The ashes were shaping. At first, meaningless lines. Then, unmistakably, a name. His name. Anun. Spelled not in ink, but in heat, in memory, in burned breath. He reached forward. His fingers brushed the shape. And the moment he did, the voice screamed. Not aloud, inside. It filled his lungs, his throat, his skull, a sound with no direction, like choking on a name you never wanted to say. He stumbled back. The ashes flared, and the fire lit itself. A flame blue and cold, flickering without heat. Within it, he saw images. The monks beneath the altar, their mouths open, no longer sewn. The bell ringing, not from the tower, but from beneath the earth. And finally, the scroll he had touched, now open, its script alive, crawling across the parchment like insects, rewriting itself. He turned to run, but the path behind him was gone. He stood in the cremation pit, and it was no longer ashes beneath his feet, but bone. Polished smooth, arranged in a spiral, a prayer spiral. He was standing at the center of the chant. Anun screamed, but no sound emerged, only ashes. He collapsed to his knees, and the moment his palms touched the ground, the whisper returned. Clearer now, a voice made of memory. I am the prayer that was never burned. I am the vow that was chanted too long. I am the mouth that spoke after death. And then, I am already in you. Anun fell back, and the fire vanished. The pit was dark once more, but on his chest dust clung in patterns. It had written something. He pulled open his robe. Across his skin, faint but clear, were the beginning lines of the forbidden chant, burned into him, not ink, not scar, something deeper, etched in intention. He rose, trembling, staggered through the trees past the silent statues toward the abbot's quarters. But the abbot was not there. In his place was a folded robe, and beside it a clay urn, still warm. Inside, ashes, and the scent of burnt sandalwood. A single prayer bead lay atop the lid. Anun collapsed beside it, shaking, because he knew what had happened. The abbot had offered himself to the fire, but not to escape, to seal something, to hold it back for one more day, one more night, one more toll. But Anun could still hear the voice. Even now, even with the ashes gone, it whispered inside him, I am the bell now. And as the sun set, he looked toward the tower and saw its shadow no longer touch the ground. It floated, and in its sway he heard a promise. Midnight was coming, and something would speak through his mouth that no longer belonged to him. There was no silence more terrifying than the one that follows a truth revealed. And now Anun knew too much. The chant was inside him, the bell was inside him, and the karmic debt of Wat Siri Chai, once buried beneath stone and ash, had found a voice, his voice. He no longer dreamed, he remembered. But not his own life, not his path as a novice monk. He remembered another man's prayers, a chant repeated in the dark, a rope pulled by blistered hands, a bell that rang not to summon the living, but to wake the listening dead. It wasn't memory, it was possession. The other monks felt it too. They no longer greeted him in the courtyard. They walked around him as though his body was made of thorns. One monk whispered a blessing as Anun passed, only for his own lips to dry and crack mid-chant, as if the words refused to protect him. That evening, Anun sat before the reflection pond. Its surface, usually still, now rippled despite the air's calm. He looked into the water, but it did not show his face. It showed the face of Pra Tamnan, the monk who had rung the bell. He had no eyes, only a mouth, moving, repeating words that echoed through Anun's chest like footsteps in a sealed hall. From behind him, a voice, "You should have left the scroll untouched." Anun turned. It was the temple's second oldest monk, Pra Kiet, a man who had not spoken in 7 years. He stood barefoot, eyes damp. The abbot tried to stop it, but karma cannot be buried forever, he whispered. Karma? Anun asked. Pra Kiet nodded. Not punishment, not revenge, balance. You called it back. Now it comes to settle the weight. Anun trembled. What must I do? Pra Kiet reached into his robe and placed a small object in Anun's palm, a stone, flat, smooth, carved with one word, release. Then he stepped back and walked into the pond. The water swallowed him silently, as if he had never been there at all. That night, the bell rang, but it did not toll. It sang, a deep, resonant hum, stretching through every crack of Wat Siri Chai, like a spine stiffening before death. Anun fell to the floor, seizing. His mouth opened, and the chant poured out, the forbidden one, the final one. His voice became many. Echoes joined him, monks from ages past, the sewn-mouthed dead, the unburned ghosts, all chanting through him as if his throat were a tunnel. Candles exploded, windows shattered inward, the temple bled dust, and from the bell tower something descended. Not a figure, not a ghost, but a shape stitched together from all the monks who died without balance. Its limbs were robes, its face was 1,000 mouths, and its heart was a bell, a cracked, pulsing bell swinging inside its chest cavity. Anun's chant stopped. The figure leaned forward. Their foreheads touched. And in that moment, he saw everything. The deaths, the failed rites, the karma never answered. All of it had waited for one thing, a body to speak through. But karma is not evil. It only responds, and it had waited too long. Anun reached inside his robe and found the stone, release. He placed it on the floor. The temple rumbled. The bell inside the creature stopped swinging, and the 1,000 mouths fell silent. For a moment, everything held still. Then the ground split open, and the tower sunk. It didn't fall. It descended, gently, like a monk kneeling before a Buddha, into the earth, into silence. The chanting stopped. Anun collapsed. When the monks found him at sunrise, he was seated in meditation posture, breathing, silent, still. But something in his eyes was gone, or perhaps something new had entered. He never spoke again, but the bell never rang again either. Wat Sirichai stood quiet. Karma, for now, had been answered. And yet, at night, when the mist curls in low around the temple grounds, the wind hums faintly, and if you listen closely, you might hear a chant, not angry, not mournful, just patient, waiting for balance to shift again. The silence that followed the descent of the bell tower was not relief, it was suspension. A breath held, a tide paused. Wat Sirichai was quiet now, but not still. It was listening. Anun remained seated in the prayer hall, unmoving. His eyes were open, but they did not blink. His lips no longer spoke, but they mouthed a rhythm no one could read. The monks gave him space. Some feared him, others pitied him, but all of them knew. He had become the scroll. The forbidden chant had etched itself into his bones, into his breath, into the pauses between his thoughts. He was not cursed, he was not possessed, he was remembered. The temple no longer echoed with chants from the living, but it pulsed with something deeper, the memory of unfinished prayer. One evening, as dusk crept into the corners of the courtyard, the oil lamps lit themselves, one by one, each flame flaring silently, like eyes opening along a hallway of the dead. And in the prayer hall, monks gathered not by order, but by instinct. They sat, cross-legged, in a wide circle around Anun. No one spoke, no one chanted, yet the air began to hum. It was not a sound, it was a presence, like old incense rising from unburned ash. The statues of the Arhats along the wall seemed to breathe, their carved eyes gleaming faintly in the low light. Then the shadows shifted. Monks who had died years ago, voices that had vanished with the abbot, even the absent echo of Brother Somchai's prayerless gaze, they all returned, not as ghosts, as reflections shimmering in the air like candlelight in water. Anun's mouth moved, slowly, precisely. The chant resumed, not the forbidden one, but something older, something purer, a prayer of release. And yet, it did not end. Each time the final syllable was spoken, the chant began again, folding over itself like cloth in a stream, endless, eternal, a prayer without punctuation. No voice could stop it, no silence could break it. The monks joined him, not by choice, by surrender. They swayed in rhythm, tears sliding down their cheeks without grief. Some smiled, some bled from the corners of their mouths, but all of them none left. The temple began to glow, faintly, not with fire, but with memory. The pillars pulsed. The bell buried beneath the earth rang once, not in the air, in their hearts. And Anun's chant deepened. He no longer sounded like himself. He sounded like many. The monks who were lost, the monks who were buried, the monks who dared to bind the dead and were never burned. All of them chanted through him now, their karma given voice, their vows given breath. This was not punishment, it was continuation. Because not all karma is corrected in fire. Some must be chanted clean, one syllable at a time, forever. When dawn came, the monks awoke in their cells. They had no memory of returning, only a ringing in their ears, only silence in the prayer hall. Anun was gone. No robe, no ashes, no mark. Only the faint sound of chanting beneath the floorboards, as if the temple had taken him and given him back to the chant. There are fires that purify, fires that release, and fires that refuse. The cremation pit of Wat Sirachai had gone cold, but the monks no longer dared approach it. Not since Anun vanished, not since the chanting had seeped into the walls like dampness in old stone. They had resumed daily rituals, outwardly, but no one was fooled. The bell was gone, the tower swallowed, and yet the weight of its presence was heavier than ever. It rang now not through sound, but through memory. One night, the head monk, Prakyet, who had once broken his silence to warn Anun, called a meeting under the Bodhi tree. The air was damp. No wind stirred. He held up a scroll wrapped in thick oilcloth and bound in red thread. "This is the last copy," he said, "of the original chant, the one used to awaken the dead." A murmur rippled through the monks, but no one interrupted. "We will destroy it tonight with fire that has never burned before, pure, new, cleansed." The scroll was placed in a brass urn, wrapped in prayer beads, oiled, blessed. The monks carried it in procession, robes rustling like soft thunder, each step echoed by the unanswered footsteps of those who no longer walked among them. They reached the pit before midnight. The stars above blinked behind thick cloud. No moon, only the dry rustle of leaves that hadn't moved in weeks. Prakyet struck the match. The flame caught easily, clean, bright. He lit the kindling. The fire rose, and the urn was placed at its center. The monks began to chant. At first it was strong, steady, each syllable marked with intention. Then the flame dimmed, not because of wind, but because the chant faltered. One by one the voices cracked, the flame shrank, the scroll remained intact. No smoke, no heat, no release. The fire touched it, but did not consume it. The flames coiled around the urn like vines, and then bent away, withdrawing, curling inward in retreat. A great gust of wind struck from nowhere. The fire was snuffed out. Silence dropped like a hammer. Prakyet stepped forward, heart pounding, and reached into the pit with iron tongs. He lifted the urn. It was ice cold. He pried open the lid. The scroll was glowing, faintly. Its seal, once bound with red thread, had unraveled on its own. The parchment inside fluttered, and a voice whispered from within the roll, "I am not yours to silence. I am not yours to burn." Prakyet recoiled, and behind him the other monks gasped. One of them had caught fire. His robe had caught fire, but there had been no spark, no contact, only Reaction, a karmic flame, one that knew guilt. It danced across his chest, silent and blue. He did not scream, only chanted until his voice dissolved into ash. The others rushed to aid him, water, blankets, prayers, but by the time they reached him, he was gone. And the ash that remained spelled one word in curling strokes: return. Prakyet dropped the urn. It rolled once, twice, then came to a stop, facing the base of the Bodhi tree. And there, embedded into the bark, was a crack, long, vertical, a wound, one none of them had seen before. From deep within it, something shimmered, not light, not shadow, but a reflection of movement, a bell swinging, back and forth, back and forth. But there was no sound, and yet all the monks covered their ears. Prakyet, shaking, fell to his knees. This fire will not take it. It must burn on its own. And somewhere far below the temple, beneath altar, beneath pit, beneath karma itself, the true bell, the one never forged by human hands, began to glow, waiting for a fire not of wood, but of choice. The fire that burns only when the final vow is spoken by the soul that awakened it. And that soul was still walking, somewhere, with Anun's face and someone else's breath. There is a moment just before sound, a tension in the air, a breath held not by lungs, but by the world itself. That is how the bell rang, without striking, without voice, without permission. It rang, and no one heard it, but everyone felt it. It began in the teeth, a pressure, then in the ears, not pain, but absence, as if the air had forgotten how to carry vibration. The monks of Wat Sirachai paused mid-step, mid-breath, mid-thought, and in that sudden stillness, their shadows moved, not wildly, not violently, just a half-step too slow or too fast, as if the light were trying to remember who they were. Prakyet collapsed during morning chant. His voice stopped mid-syllable. When they rushed to him, his mouth was open, but inside, blood, not dripping, pooling. From the ears, too, from the nose. He had not been struck, he had been heard by something that made no sound. And he was not the only one. 3 more monks began to bleed before the hour ended. One fell into deep meditation and never emerged. One stared at the bell tower's remains and spoke only one sentence before his voice left him. The bell is swinging in a place where sound cannot reach. And then, silence. Absolute. Even the birds were gone. Even the insects fell quiet. Even the breeze, which once stirred the bamboo like gentle breath, now held its breath. The temple stood in unnatural hush. Anun returned that night. He appeared in the center of the courtyard, not walking, not emerging, just there, standing. His robes were different now, older, burned at the edges. His eyes calm, but his lips were moving again. No sound, only motion. He walked slowly through the halls. Every monk watched, None bowed, none approached. He made his way to the main prayer hall, the heart of the temple, where the statue of the Buddha, cracked and faded, sat in eternal compassion. Enun stood before it and knelt. And that was when the real ringing began. Not in the ears, in the walls, in the floorboards, in the bones of every monk, a resonance that came from inside. Fingers trembled, teeth chattered without cold. Then voices, the long dead, the buried, the sewn-mouthed monks whose karma was never burned. Their prayers rose through the temple, through Enun, through every monk who had ever forgotten to finish a chant. And then the bell rang. Inside each of them. One monk fell. Another clutched his chest. A third collapsed in the lotus position, eyes open wide, tears falling without emotion. And still, no one could hear the bell, but everyone remembered it. Enun opened his mouth, not wide, just enough. From within it no chant emerged, no breath, only a stillness so pure it vibrated. And then a single syllable, whispered, not spoken, one that meant ending, and beginning, and return, and the bell inside them stopped. No echo, no fade, just absence. Enun closed his mouth. He stood. He turned to face the monks who remained standing, and for the first time he smiled, not in joy, not in triumph, but in understanding. Then he stepped outside. The sky above him was dark, not with night, but with space. Not a cloud, not a star, not a sound. He knelt in the courtyard and vanished, not in smoke, not in light, but as if he had stepped fully into the silence that had waited for him all along. And in the prayer hall, every monk heard a final breath that wasn't theirs. Some things do not end with silence. They end when there is no one left to hear. Wat Sirachai stood alone now. The wind returned first, a thin current that passed through the bamboo and did not stay. Then the birds, cautiously, as if asking permission. Then the monks, though fewer than before, emerged one by one from their rooms like petals unfolding after a long night of storm. But no one spoke. The bell had not rung for 3 nights. Not in sound, not in the bones, not in the earth beneath. There had been no final chime, and that was what frightened them most. Because when something terrible ends, there is usually a sound, a scream, a cry, a breath. But this had simply stopped. Prakyet was the last to rise. He had aged 20 years in a week. Hair grayer, skin thinner, a faint tremor in his hands as he lit the morning incense. He did not chant. He only whispered one line. If the karma has returned to balance, let us not tip the scale again. The monks resumed their lives in fragments, sweeping, breathing, planting, but they did not enter the bell tower ruins, nor did they speak Enun's name. Not because they forgot him, but because they remembered him too well. On the 7th day, a traveler arrived. Not a monk, not a pilgrim, just a man in gray drawn by stories of silence. He asked if he could stay the night. Prakyet allowed it. That evening, the traveler sat by the old pond. The wind brushed his coat. The trees whispered gently. And then, from deep within the temple ground, he heard it, or rather, he felt it, a vibration, faint in the soles of his feet. He rose slowly and turned toward the ruins of the bell tower. Nothing moved, but in the air above it, the faintest shimmer, like heat or breath. He stepped closer and saw something, not physical, not shadow, but memory. A monk kneeling, robe burnt at the hem, face calm, mouth closed, hands resting in his lap. It was Anun, but not just Anun. It was everyone who had ever heard the bell, all within him, all kneeling, all silent. As the traveler watched, the image began to fade. But just before it vanished, Anun looked up and smiled. And then the traveler understood. The bell had rung one final time, but it had not tolled in sound. It had tolled within silence itself. A sound so complete, so final, that it could exist once when no one was left to ring it and no one was left to listen. The final toll, and the end of the prayer that had never ended. Wat Sirichai stands still today. The bell tower is gone, the pit is overgrown, and the monks chant quietly, not out of fear, but respect, because they know some karma does not seek revenge, it seeks only to be heard. And now it has been. One toll, one soul, one silence that stretched wide enough to hold all voices. And after that, nothing more was needed.